Welcome to the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Hope Jones. This podcast is designed to encourage and equip you to be a trailblazer right where you are, to help you discover your God-given purpose and bring you talks each week that will inspire you to do what you were made for. So let's get into this week's episode. Hey friends, I am so glad you're here this week because you are in for a treat. I interview a longtime Instagram friend who we finally got to have a conversation on the podcast, Tabitha Panariso, and you are just going to love this episode. If you have ever walked through or are currently walking through any type of rejection or just disappointment in life, this episode is for you. Tabitha is a licensed professional counselor, and she's also a writer and a speaker, and she's dedicated to blending Christian faith, theology, counseling into the fabric of her everyday life. Her new book just came out that we're going to talk about in this episode, and I know that you are just going to really love this conversation. At the heart of all of Tabitha's work is a deep commitment to holding space for life's darkest moments and guiding others towards wholeness with compassion and clarity. She and her husband, with their 3 children, live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I can't wait for you to hear this episode, so let's hop on in. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazer Talks. I'm excited because this week I have my longtime internet friend, first time getting to actually sit down and talk with her, Tabitha. Tabitha, thank you so much for being on the show this week, and tell the listeners a bit about who you are, what you do, and all of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. It's wild how the internet can bring you together.
Yes.
Crazy. It's crazy. So I am a Christ-centered and trauma-informed therapist here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I'm also a first-time author, just recently wrote my first book. Beyond that, I am a wife and a mom to 3 kids. And in my spare time, I have been watching a lot of TV lately and I'm desperately waiting for summer to come. And just do the things I really enjoy doing, which is hiking, camping, being out in the mountains. So just really biding my time for that, I think, right now at the moment.
Yeah. Well, and you guys have some beautiful views. I've never been to Colorado, but I've just seen pictures, and it's just such like a postcard, picture perfect look that I'm like, I need to come out there sometime
You
because
do.
that would be like, I would love that. Because, well,
You could go hike.
I'm like, that would be like the prettiest hike. Because I feel like when I go hiking here in Ohio, it's just like regular woods and stuff, and it's pretty, but it's not like those pretty mountains and things that you guys have
Yeah.
with like the beautiful wildflowers and stuff that I
I mean,
always
there
see in
are
pictures.
different parts of Colorado, so it's
Yeah.
not like every part of Colorado is like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
definitely the higher you go, the prettier it gets, I think, for sure. Where I'm at, it's like a good mixture,
Mixture.
maybe, but it's not as green as I think other places. We just don't get a lot of rain,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Lots
Yeah.
of sun, but not lots of rain.
Yeah. Like it has its pros and cons.
It does, like any place, like any place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But you mentioned this already, but you just came out with your first book, Loyal in His Love. And I would love for you just to tell us a little bit about your book first off. And then I want to ask you some different questions kind of centered around that I think will help our listeners.
Yeah, I would love to. So, this isn't the book that I dreamed of writing. It's far more vulnerable and exposing than I ever imagined I would ever have to put words to a page for. But it is my story. It is my testimony, I think, if you will, and just kind of how I've become the person I am and what God has done in my heart in the last, 38 years of my life. But really, it just tells the story of how when I was young, my biological father, he abandoned me. My mom and dad got divorced really early on. And somewhere along the lines, he just decided that he didn't want to be a part of my life anymore. And so that really significantly and drastically, I think, impacted me as a kid. I don't know that I realized that it impacted me. And I don't think as a kid we're looking at these things and saying, oh, this is how it's shaping me to be this kind of person. And then as I grew and got older, I just went through a lot of different painful rejections and betrayals from people that I loved and from people who really meant the world to me, whether that was in friendship or in church. Those are some of the more significant ones. And of course, just I was a military brat, so I
Mhm.
moved every 3 years of my life. And so you can imagine just even what felt like rejection sometimes when you move to a new place and you're trying to fit in and belong. And so there's just a point in the last decade where I realized that rejection really was this big part of my story and my life, maybe more so than most people. And there came a point where those wounds kind of began to fester, and I really needed to deal with them and process them. And there just wasn't a lot that I could turn to, or a lot of things I could look at and say, oh, this is how I'm supposed to deal with this. I felt like mostly it was like, you just kind of have to get through it and you just have to like get over it. And, hey, like your life is better off with this without this person or this other person here and there. And so, I that didn't work for me. It wasn't working. And so this book really is my journey and really where God led me through in order to get beyond and to navigate through the pain that rejection has caused in my life so that I could live more whole and more free and more healed. And so that's what it was born from. And here we are
Yeah.
on the other
No,
side.
and I feel like books like that are never fun to write, but the the fruit that comes from writing it and knowing that it's helping so many other people put into words what maybe they've never been able to before, or just what they have walked through similarly. And like your words can be kind of that balm to help them heal on their journey, I think is so beautiful. But it is hard to write about the hard things in life and share that vulnerability. So thank you for writing about that topic, because it's something that I know I could relate to, and so many people can relate to on different levels of rejection. And I would love to hear just a little bit more about some of the things that maybe helped you with, one, identifying rejection, and then two, kind of starting to go on that path of healing from rejection, and what were the things that kind of helped you on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't one of these aha moments where I suddenly was like, this is something I'm struggling with, and this is something I need to deal with it. It was more through some friendship breakups that I went through where I realized just how entangled I was in these relationships. And it was taking everything in me to heal from these friendship breakups, which was so surprising to me. I guess it was just the first time I had ever experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
These were people who really mattered, who I had spent a good chunk of life with. So losing them and not having them in my life anymore really left this like open gash. And that was really the moment where I started to look at myself and say, oh, something's wrong here because I'm
Mm-hmm.
not able to just bounce back. I like it's really hard for me right now to pick myself up from this. And that really led me to believe that there was so much more baggage that was really kind of undercurrent to all of
Mm-hmm.
that I really needed to look at. And so that is initially like what began this journey was those friendship breakups, and then realizing, oh, like I rejection is really hurtful to me more than just like because these people don't want me in my life, but because I believe it's saying something about who I am as a person. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the ending of these relationships is saying something about my character and about who I am. And so I really had to like do the work to detangle myself from those beliefs, which, as you know, like really stemmed from, early on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just this moment, it was really all of these other moments compounding into one.
Yeah. How do you feel like being, because you said you're a Christ-centered and trauma-informed therapist. How do you feel like that kind of helped you with a unique perspective to be able to go through that and work through some of those things that maybe others who obviously aren't a therapist, or maybe they are, but most listeners may not be. What could they maybe ask their therapist or counselor to
Yeah.
help them identify and walk through some of that healing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think And I think more people nowadays probably have this lens. I don't know that it's necessarily specific to therapists, although this is probably just how we view the world just in general.
Mhm.
But I think innately I knew there's more to this than just what I'm seeing right
Mm.
here, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we forget that our responses to circumstances, our reactions to pain and suffering, often, if not almost always, are really reflecting something from our past experience, right? Like it's
Mhm.
telling us something about a time that was really formative to us. There's a reason why this particular thing hurts more for you than maybe it hurts more for somebody else. There's something unresolved there. And so I think for somebody who may be experiencing rejection in this light, or really anything that feels particularly burdensome, my
Mhm.
question to you is, where is that coming from? Like, there's something more there. It's not just heavy because of right now, it's heavy because of something that you've brought in from your past self. And so I think when we have like that holistic perspective of knowing that who we are today really is formed by who we were growing up, that really shifts the way that we can heal, right? Because we're looking at our timelines, we're looking at ourselves from this like holistic perspective instead of just this present tense moment.
Yeah. I think that's so helpful to know too, because I think sometimes we just want a quick fix, and knowing that sometimes it takes time peeling back those different layers and going through the different healing processes, to kind of uncover, it's almost like a connect the dots type of thing. It's like this one's connected to this, and then you uncover that, and it's connected to this, and
Yeah.
then it just keeps going. I would love to talk a little bit too about kind of that friendship breakup aspect that you talked about, because I know that's something that I don't feel like is talked about enough. I think it's starting to be talked about more, but I think a lot of women experience that. I've gone through that before too in my 20s, and it was tough to navigate, and I would love to know what you would kind of say to people who are navigating that or have gone through it in the past, and like what encouragement you might give them in kind of finding healing in that.
Yeah. That's such a big question.
Yeah.
Do I have several hours? No. Can I take you out for coffee and just
Yeah.
sit with you? Yeah, it is talking we are talking about it more and more. I think there's a lot of shame attached to it, right? It's
Mhm.
just like I was saying before, we just can't help but look at ourselves and blame ourselves for relationship ruptures and wonder what's wrong with us. And I think while that can be helpful, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for us to self reflect and say, hey, what was I bringing into this relationship that maybe needs to be improved or worked on? I think that that shame can really keep us stuck in pain. And so I think really starting with compassion, like if you're in that space and you've lost a friend or you're really struggling with the friendship, my number one recommendation is how can you be compassionate to yourself, right? How can you remember that it takes two people in a relationship to make it work, that the onus is not just on you. Like, this is more than just what you did or didn't do. Two people, it's a system, right? And so your reactions are causing them to react, and that's causing you to
Mhm.
respond, and so forth, right? Like it's this negative reactive cycle that we find ourselves in. And so certainly we can learn how to take care of ourselves and be more self-reflective. But I think that really begins with giving ourselves a lot of grace. And I
Mhm.
think that grace can also stem from just knowing that you're not alone. That as women, many of us are experiencing those friendship breakups. And so knowing that, I hope, can give that margin of grace and really just to not blame yourself or think that you need to tear yourself down and
Mhm.
feel like you have to rebuild yourself to be somebody new. You don't. I think there is friendships I'm learning. This is hard for me to say out loud because I don't love it, but friendships aren't meant for every season, and and that's okay. And friendships aren't meant for every version of who we are, right? And so sometimes the version of ourselves that we're bringing into a relationship is not the version of our friend's self that is going to connect and be sustainable. And that's okay for us to let go of that and also honor them and ourselves in the process and say it's okay for us to be in these spaces that we're in.
Yeah. How would you like kind of define or I guess distinguish like whenever it's a friendship that's a full on breakup, like just break it off, it's just not worth salvaging, and one where like maybe some reconciliation might need to happen? Like, how do you kind of distinguish? Because I think sometimes we struggle to let go with friendships, especially because, friendships and like regular, romantic type of relationships are so different. And I think friendship breakups almost hurt worse than romantic ones sometimes because it's like, yes, the romantic relationship, if it breaks off, it hurts. But in a sense, like that friendship was almost a different kind of safe space.
Yeah.
How do we distinguish? Because I know I have gone through that before where I did everything I could to apologize or reconcile anything that I felt I may have contributed or done wrong or whatever, but it just didn't feel reconcilable. But there's other times where maybe it was just a fight or a conversation and then you reconcile. Like, how do you kind of distinguish between those two areas? Like, when is it time to reconcile and when is it time just to cut it all off?
Yeah, I don't know that there is an algorithm for that, but certainly I think it takes two people to reconcile and it takes two people to repair. And so I think it's important for us to look at what we're bringing into the relationship and what the other person is bringing into the relationship. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that helps us to kind of ascertain what is this friendship actually. And sometimes it's not that the friendship has to end, it's just that we have to define it differently and we
Mm-hmm.
need to lower our expectations for what we are hoping to get out of that friendship. And sometimes even just in lowering the expectations, that really takes the pressure off and there it doesn't feel like there is a rupture anymore, right? Because suddenly
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, I don't expect you to be texting me every week, right? Because I'm putting you over here in this box. And so I think starting there is a great place of, okay, do I need to change what my expectation is for this relationship? Do I need to define it differently? Is this
Mm-hmm.
person more of an acquaintance than they are a best friend? Can I move them through those different boxes, if you will?
Yeah.
I think when, like you said, somebody else isn't wanting or desiring to repair the relationship, say that you're bringing your most vulnerable self and you're asking something of them that's reasonable and their response is doesn't really matter what you say, like this is just who I am, then that might be a time where you recognize, okay, this isn't a relationship necessarily that I can participate in anymore. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay for us to recognize that and possibly walk away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it really is about both of you and what you're willing to do to make that relationship possible, that friendship possible.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful because I think it can be I think sometimes we wanna hold on for dear life, and sometimes
Oh,
we
yeah.
have to recognize when we have to just let go and let it be and move on as much as it hurts. And kind of in that same vein, like, thinking of trustworthy relationships, like how are you able to kind of build these different more trustworthy relationships as an adult with your friends and your husband and other people in your life that you would help other people with recognizing that?
Yeah, I think I would first say that I'm still a work in process
Yeah.
too. um, I think I'm still learning what that looks like. What I know is that trust is built from being able to consistently and faithfully repair ruptures within relationships and acknowledging that ruptures are always going to happen in
Hmm.
relationships, right? Like we are always going to have moments where we feel a certain way about what someone has said or done. And I think what helps is learning to change my response in those particular moments, right? Like, what am I bringing to the table? Am I bringing my most honest and authentic and loving and curious self? That is going to help kind of create that trustworthy foundation. And my hope is that they will also bring that self to the friendship as well, right?
Hmm.
I've noticed, especially as I've kind of rebuilt after breaking up with those friends, that when I feel insecure or when I can feel myself wanting to tell a story about that relationship, right? Like, because we can get in our head, right? Like someone can say
Mhm.
something or do something or not do something, and suddenly we're like, it's over. Like,
Mhm.
like the panic kind of starts, and we're like, they must think this or they must believe this. I've learned to quell that voice by looking for evidence that suggests either what I am trying to believe or evidence against it, right?
Mhm.
And then if it still feels foggy, I might actually go to that person and express my insecurity. And that
Mhm.
can be really helpful too, of saying, hey, I'm feeling some kind of way about how we left things or what I said. And usually the response I get is so gracious and
Mhm.
so loving and be like, oh, I didn't even think that, right? Like I don't even know where that's coming from. But even just that immediately soothes my heart and allows me to trust them and trust the relationship that we're building. And so I think that really is the only way I know how to build trust, is to take
Mhm.
the risk to be vulnerable, which is scary when you've been
Mhm.
hurt multiple times. But that's unfortunately the only way that we can build it, is by
Yeah.
just allowing ourselves to kind of lean in, even though the fear wants us to stay out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love to dig in a little bit more around kind of how we begin healing those wounds of rejection, because I think that that allows us to do what you just said of like putting ourselves out there again to start building trust. As we kind of have to do a little bit of healing first. So are there any like practical things that you learned that might put us on that journey to start healing those wounds?
Yeah. I believe for me that healing can be somewhat hierarchical in nature. And what I mean by that is, like, healing is messy and we're always in the process of
Mhm.
healing and becoming. But I do think what really helped is me starting with my relationship with God
Mhm.
and then moving into my relationship with myself. And as I'm working on those relationships, that is helping me heal and rebuild my relationships with others. And so, really asking myself, like, what am I believing about God because of this rejection that I've experienced, or because of this betrayal? Like, how is my faith being damaged or even
Mhm.
being strengthened by this rejection? And really asking myself, even, like, what am I believing about God to be true based on what I'm seeing other people do, right? Because we
Yeah.
unfortunately and naturally just kind of mirror those things, right? Like, we don't even realize that the way that we're seeing God is based on how we've been treated by other people. And so I think starting there and then moving into this place of, okay, what am I believing about myself to be true based off of this rejection? What are these stories that I'm telling about myself to myself that maybe is creating moments of self-sabotage, right? Like, not taking advantage of opportunities because I'm afraid that the other foot's going to drop, or because I'm
Mhm.
afraid of rejection or afraid of failure, afraid of people turning their backs against me. What would it look like to tell a different story about myself? How do I get to even now view myself in light of who God is in my life, right? So I think those two things are really important and a really big deal to healing. And then inevitably, as we begin to grasp who God is, which is loyal and faithful, who never forsakes us, regardless of how messy we are, and as we begin to be able to dispense like compassion and grace to ourselves as we're kind of growing and changing, those things completely and significantly alter our relationship with other people. The more we treat ourselves with compassion, the more we can show up in other relationships and give people compassion, right? The more we feel like we can be vulnerable with ourselves, I think that really encourages us to learn how to be vulnerable with other people. And so it's sort of like this waterfall effect, I kind of imagine it, right? From top down, the more I'm looking at God and really self reflecting about myself. You'd think that would make you more self focused, but I truly believe that that actually makes us more equipped to be other focused and
Mhm.
walk into those relationships with love and kindness and generosity and the ability even to receive. And I think that's really important when we're healing from rejection, because rejection makes us want to just kind of grip and like
Mhm.
live with our fist shut. Whereas generosity, or like knowing that God is pouring into us, allows us to be more open-handed and receive from other people. And that's important when we're healing.
Yeah. No, that and I love what you said too about starting with God because that was something I dealt with rejection kind of growing up in different facets of my life, whether it was dating relationships or different things like that. And I think that for so long I viewed God as like that he would reject me if I did something wrong or
Yeah.
things like that, and it can show up in so many aspects of our lives. So I think I loved what you said about healing that part and then working on the layer of ourselves because that can affect so many areas that we don't even realize. But then if we don't get that kind of taken care of, it does start to bleed into other areas with friendships and things like that. And I know you also kind of talk about in your book times that you would betray yourself. What did that look like, and what would you kind of warn others of, like, being on the lookout for how they might be betraying themselves at times too?
Yeah, I think self-betrayal really looked often like shrinking myself and not showing up fully or wholly as who I believe God created me to be. And it
Mhm,
looked like wearing a mask in order
mm,
to be able to walk into a room and adjust to that context, that environment in order to fit in, because that really was important, right? Because if we are fully and are wholly ourselves, we don't want to feel the pain of rejection if people can't accept us as is. And so it feels more comfortable to just show up as what people might expect you to be, or what is expected of that particular environment, or the people that you're around at the moment. And so that was really detrimental, because I think that that means that you lose your voice,
mm,
you lose your ability to, for me, create the way that you might want to create, right? Like it can even go all the way down to like how you dress, right? Like,
mm,
are
mm,
you even dressing the way that you want to dress? Or is it according to what some influencer on Instagram is telling you this is how you're supposed to dress, right? Like, so it can be very minute, I think. And so I think looking for ways that you might be betraying yourself means looking for ways where you are literally shrinking and conforming yourself to the boxes that other people have set as some sort of standard. And
mm,
we don't have to live that way. We can set ourselves free from that, because we're the only ones who are putting ourselves in those boxes. So that means that we can step outside of them if we want to. And so I think this is something that I'm still like pressing into and learning how to do for myself.
mhm,
And certainly, I think it is a lifelong process of kind of figuring out, like, what does it look like for me to enter into the world as Tabitha, right? Or as Courtney? Like, what does that mean for me to show up and just be willing to expand myself completely without fear of rejection and without this desire to make myself more palatable or
mm,
convenient to the people around me? Is it okay that I might ruffle some feathers, saying the things
mhm,
that I want to say or doing the things that I want to do? Is
mhm,
that, am I willing to do that? And I think those are questions we can ask ourselves too, because if the answer and the response is heck no, that might mean that you are maybe betraying parts of yourself that would
mm.
prefer to show up differently.
Yeah, that's something I've been learning. I never thought to put it in those words, but that's something that I, as a recovering people pleaser, have learned over the years of not making myself small for other people that it's uncomfortable for them for the things that I do with speaking or writing or running my own business, things like that. And I've learned to just embrace who God made me to be. I've been learning to overcome fear of man, which I think goes along with
Yes.
kind of that betrayal of self. And I've never thought about it in those words. I love that phrasing because that's really what you're doing whenever you give in to fear of man or you kind of shrink yourself back for other people because they're intimidated by you. And really it's betrayal of self. So I love that you put that into words in that way.
Yeah. And it's like almost even betraying the design that God really set for
Yeah.
you and for your life, right? Like I remember years ago someone telling me this story about oh gosh, basically like this envisioning yourself in the kitchen with God, right? And
Mhm.
God has painstakingly created and baked this cake. Like homemade it, right?
Mhm.
Frosted it, decorated it. And God has placed this cake in front of you and said, "Here you go. I've created this." And you kind of look at it and you say, we're going to do something different here, or we're going to throw this in the trash and start over and rebuild." And in a lot of ways, like that's what we do with the image of who God has made us. We just scoff at it, even
Mhm.
though from the beginning he said, "I made you out of delight, out of the goodness of my heart. Like, this is how I created you." And what would it look like for us to just take a big old bite and say, good?
Yeah, no, seriously, I love that picture because it's so true. I mean, we think about that if we did that for someone else, and we don't look at other oftentimes, not everybody, but most of us don't look at other people that way and be like, "Man, God really messed up on that one." But we look in the mirror at ourselves and we're like, "Oh man, this isn't right," or that, or someone, didn't like my Instagram post, or whatever the
Yeah.
things are that are all these little lies that just kind of are like little birds chirping at us. And we're so quick to think that there's something wrong with us. And there's such a thing as, being self-aware. Like you don't want to just be an unsufferable person, but most of the time it's like we're just trying to conform ourselves to be liked by others whenever there's nothing wrong with us to begin with. And
Yeah.
I think that's where that lie of rejection starts to really eat at us, especially the more times we have been rejected, it kind of compounds to making us think we're the problem rather than thinking the other thing that is
Yeah.
causing the rejection is the problem.
It's so true. Yeah, and that's where I really take heart of what Jesus said to the disciples of be like children, right? Like I think
Mm,
that plays on so many different levels, but even in this area, when I look at my kids are not thinking twice about what they're wearing when they leave the house.
mhm.
They're not thinking about what other people are thinking about them. At least, I mean, until they get to a certain age,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It kind of switches over and changes. But the purity of in which I like even my daughter, just the outfits she puts on and walks out of the house with, I'm like, "You are bold." But she's not even thinking that. She's just like, "This is what I like. This is what I want to wear. And this is what I'm going to do. So deal with it." And that
Mhm.
is the kind of confidence that I want to own again as a woman in my, late 30s, early 40s. Like that's what I
Yeah.
want to bring into the world. I think that's what God created us to do and be.
Yeah. No, I saw that. I had a Bible study this morning with some other entrepreneurs, and they sometimes bring their kids just because it's more
Mhm.
convenient. And the girls were playing at this little kiddie table behind us, and this little girl from like who didn't know them at all. She was there with her family. Just walks on up and is like, "Hey, can I play with you guys?" Or like I don't think she asked. She just started playing with
Yeah.
them. Like, and I said to one of the other ladies with me, I was like, "Why do we struggle with that now?" Like I'm 33 and I would like rather go sit in a corner and like not be seen than walk up to a complete stranger and be like, "Hey, can we be friends?" I'm like, "Why do we do that now?" I'm like, "That's what we need to do is like those little kids, like they literally just and they played together the whole time we had this Bible study. And it was just like they didn't care what each other looked like. They didn't care if they thought they were weird for
Mhm.
walking up. And like we're so self-conscious of that. I was like, so what you said just now about being like little children, I was like, I want to regain that too because there's so often I like fear walking, even at like networking events and stuff. I'm like, I don't know, like I don't want to walk up and be weird or awkward or whatever, and I have to like
Yes.
catch myself. But those little girls like inspired me today. I was like, I need that kind of confidence.
Like, how can I put myself back in that body of like an
Yes.
8-year-old? Let's make that happen.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
And one other area I wanted to talk a little bit about, just because I know so many people have probably experienced this form of rejection, is around rejection through their church and through their church community. And I know you talk very vulnerably about that in your book about the church you formerly attended. And I would love to just talk a little bit about that, what you would say. One, just a little, whatever you're willing to share around that and your experience, and then how that could maybe what you learned so that that can maybe encourage someone who has maybe left the church or is trying to find another church because they experienced a form of rejection. Just anything you can speak into that.
Yeah, so my husband and I, he worked and I volunteered at this church for probably a decade, for a very long time, for a very formative time in our lives. Like this was pre-kids,
Mhm.
we started to have kids, started to develop these relationships. And unfortunately, my husband was just really working a lot and just really felt like his time, our time as a family was being abused and not honored.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of things that were going on at that time, and we recognized that we really needed to get out. A lot of our friends were being fired and let go for a
Mhm.
lot of really just uncharitable reasons, and we could tell that the environment was changing. And so I'm glad that we had the foresight to make the decision to leave. That didn't make it any easier. It wasn't something that we wanted to do, but that we felt like it was necessary to do, which anyone who's been in that position knows. It's funny, like you go online and everyone has kind of a hot take about church, hurt and spiritual abuse.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's like, well, people, they're leaving their churches and they're not thinking twice about these things. And I just don't think that that's actually the common rhetoric or narrative of people who are leaving their churches. I think it's actually really difficult for someone to make that decision.
Mhm.
I think most people recognize, like, oh, this is my community and this is hard to have to like go find another one. No one wants to start over again when
Mhm.
they've been in a place, especially for that long. And we went through this prior to this topic being even very public. No one was talking about it. I didn't know anybody who had experienced what we had experienced. And so that certainly felt really isolating and really hard. I just remember anytime I would talk to somebody feeling very misunderstood. We went
Mhm.
through a time where we just weren't in a place where we could go to church. And so that felt just from other people's perception. I even remember having a
Mhm.
conversation with someone, be like, "You've got to get back in church. You got it." Like just a lot of fear around, like,
Mhm.
if you're not in church, that's the end. And certainly the Bible does tell us that we need to be in community. And so that is something
Mhm.
that we need to honor. But I recognized, I think my husband and I both recognized that we needed space and time. And that was the only way that we were going to be able to get through what we were
Mhm.
going through, particularly because my image of who God was and my idea of faith was sort of in shambles a little bit. I just think that I recognize, you talked about like the fear of man and like just this power and authority that we put on other people. And something that we had done, or I had done, I don't want to speak for my husband, something I had done was that I saw my pastor as this just holier than thou person who had all authority, who had all power. And so for me to know and be informed of some of the things that I knew, that was difficult
Yeah.
swallow, to be like, oh, this person who has all of these master's degrees, who's getting up on the pulpit every Sunday and teaching about the Bible, also is operating in this way, which
Mhm.
feels and was hypocritical. That is really difficult to hold in both hands. And so I really had to disentangle some ideas. And so I think what I would tell somebody is that while this is a hurtful experience, I do believe that it's actually an invitation to know God more. And it's weird, but I look back on that time and I do not regret a single moment of it. The way that I was prior to leaving our church and my faith now is so much more robust. It's so much more rooted and anchored in who God actually is. It has very little to do with my relationship with the church or my relationship with leaders within my church. My faith has nothing to do with that. And so knowing that my personal relationship became so much stronger and so much more undamageable, I guess that's not even a word, but like it can't be rocked, right?
Yeah.
I could confidently say, yeah, I can see all of these things that are happening around me now. Like we see it in the news. Pastors are
Mhm.
falling left and right.
Mhm.
That doesn't change my relationship with God anymore because God and I have already worked through that. It's different. It's personal.
Mhm.
And I think that is the reward at the end of going through that pain and hurt, is being
Mhm.
able to see God in a new light, our image of God not being shaped by who other people are. And so thank the Lord, honestly, that it happened for me, right?
Mhm.
I'm so grateful that what was in the dark was brought out to the light, because I'd rather be here now than where I was 15
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because I know I have so many conversations with people who have walked through all different types of church hurt, but that the rejection or just the disappointment in a leader in the church is one of the main reasons someone has walked away. And so I think that's really great perspective for them to think through and pray through and consider as they're on their own journey with that. So thank you. And one of the last questions I love to ask is, since this is the Trailblazer Talks, I love to ask guests, what is one piece of advice that you would give to others that God has taught you along your trail in life?
So good. I love the name of your podcast. It's so
Thank you.
good. I have learned, I don't know, maybe hopefully this is an antithesis to what your podcast is about, but I don't think it's us so much who blazes the trail that we're on. It really is
Mhm.
the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we want to get ahead of ourselves. I can think back to so many times in the last 10 years where I was just like, it's not working out for me, or all of these people are being given these opportunities and nothing is happening for me. I feel like I'm at a standstill. And so there's like this massive amount of missing out that we think that we're doing on a regular basis. But what
Mhm.
I've learned is that with the Lord, it's impossible to miss out on what is for
Mm.
you. And while the timing certainly does not ever line up with what we hope for or expect or anticipate, the timing really is always right. And even just in regards to like writing a book, like that was a big dream of mine. I've had that for many years. But I'm so glad that I didn't have the opportunity to write a book 10 years ago. I'm glad that it
Mhm.
happened when it did. And I could say that now in hindsight. I think if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I'd be like, no, I want to do it now. But that would be a book that it would be lacking in wisdom. It would be
Mm.
lacking in maturity. It wouldn't necessarily, I think, have as much to offer as what maybe this book does today, right? And obviously, everyone's journey is different, but I just want people to trust and know that the time is coming and you can't miss out on what is for you. I really believe that. I really believe that. And sometimes it really just is about us keeping going and
Yeah.
not giving up and just keep planting the seeds. Keep your hands in the soil and trust that the Lord is the one who brings the rain and he's the one who brings the harvest. And that all we have to do is to continue to be
Yeah.
consistent and to show up.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that actually goes perfectly with kind of the theme of the show of we aren't blazing our own trails on our own. What's, the God given trail that God's put us on. And sometimes that can be hard because we might be the first to go down that path, or God might be, calling us on a path that's different from other people, but He's given us each our unique paths to go down to help others and to kind of be that person that's a few steps ahead of the people we're called to help. So I love that. And I love what you said too about the person 10 years ago who wanted that book, may not have been ready for it yet, or it may not have had the wisdom. Because you also know that I want to write a book too. And that's something we've talked about on Instagram and stuff. And just seeing the timing for all my friends that have gotten to write books, I'm like, okay, Lord, I trust your timing. I know your timing will be perfect whenever, which I've self published a book, but I want to traditionally publish someday. And I know that God's timing will be perfect for that. And just stories like yours and so many of my other author friends, that's been encouraging too. So I love hearing that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to look like everybody else's way that they got to that dream. But I think we really do compare and think, if I check all these boxes, then I'm going to arrive
Yeah.
suddenly. And it's like, actually, God might have different boxes for you to be checking.
Yes, I know, they make it seem like, "Oh, if you just do this, if you just get enough followers, or you just have this big of an email list," or all these things, and it's like you end up chasing the numbers rather than the heart that you had for it to begin with, and I've definitely had to kinda backtrack in some of that too, where I had to be like, "Okay, Lord, this is really about the people and the community. It's not about the numbers. And I know that it's a business and things like that, but I have to trust that you will open those doors when it's meant to be opened. And I
Yeah.
love seeing that for other friends of all different platform sizes who have
Mhm.
gotten book deals at different
Mhm.
stages. So, yeah. Well, one last fun thing I love to ask people. So, what is something you're just loving or that's bringing you joy right now that maybe we can discover too?
I am on a handmade pottery kick for coffee
Oh,
mugs.
I
So
love that.
a long time ago, we have so many coffee mugs, first off. I
Oh,
mean,
I
it
do
is
too.
bad. It's
I do too.
bad.
My
It's so
husband's
bad.
like, please don't buy any more coffee mugs. I'm like, but I love them.
So I have all these ceramic ones, and I just recently, I really love going to farmers markets and markets during the summertime and in the
Hmm.
wintertime around Christmas. It's one of my favorite things to do. And so
Hmm.
I recently, in the last 2 years, have decided to replace all of my random ceramic mugs with locally like handmade pottery wheel thrown mugs. They're more expensive, but they're
Hmm.
beautiful. And they just, I don't know, it brings me a lot of joy to sip out of a coffee cup that I know that somebody painstakingly has created. So it's just
Yeah,
a little bit of beauty and art that I get to bring into the world with my morning ritual, not just my morning ritual. If I'm honest, I'm drinking coffee all day, but you
me too. Me too.
know what I mean.
Yes, yes. It starts in the morning, but then it just
It
continues through
just
the
keeps
whole
going.
day.
It just
Just
keeps
keeps
going.
going. I love that. No, I honestly never really thought about it that way of because I have a couple of mugs like that, but I love what you just said about it being like someone handcrafted that. Whereas maybe some of the more commercialized ones, a machine probably made it. I love the fact that, someone handmade that piece just for you to buy. I think that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
and then the rest I'll just put in Goodwill for someone else
Yeah.
to treasure and love
Yes.
one day.
Yes. Yes. We love thrifting and
Yes, we
perusing
do.
around Goodwill.
Yes.
That's perfect. I love that. Well, is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with? And then also, how can they find you? How can they find your book? All of that good stuff connecting with you.
Yeah. They can follow me on Instagram at Tabitha Panariso. I also have a Substack called Unseen Things, and that's where I've been putting a lot of my long form writing. Instagram, I'm mainly there for the stories.
Hmm.
It's just a changing
It is.
landscape that we are constantly trying to figure out, which we can't.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
again, there's no equations to
Yes.
what to do. And then, yeah, I just think for anyone listening who's experiencing rejection, first off, I just want to invite you, if you need just to have someone who you can converse with or talk to, my direct messages are always open on Instagram. And so, not as a therapist, but as just somebody who can encourage you, I'm there. And I think that's the biggest thing is just or the theme I'm hearing today and just being reminded of constantly is I just think there's so much power in someone else saying me too. And for you
Mm,
to know you're not the only person who's gone through rejection or even abandonment or even betrayal. And as hard as they are, just being able to link arms with those people who can say, yeah, this hurts and it's okay to say it hurts, I think that makes all the difference. And so just really wanting that person to know you're not alone. You're not alone
yeah.
in this. Even though you and I can't physically and tangibly be there with them, the Lord can, and God is holding you and is going to carry you through this terrain that feels really difficult and hard.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll link your book. It's available kind of wherever books are sold, I assume. But it'll be linked in the show notes for those who want a quick link to purchase her book. But Tabitha, thank you so much for being on the show. I loved our conversation today.
Me too. Thank you.